Welcome to Conscious Conversations. Tonight's conversation is with Craig Phillips, who most of you have probably seen by now as part of our spiritual ministry team. Craig is a wealth of a background in Eastern teachings and just all sorts of spiritual teachings in general. And I really wanted to talk with him tonight about a phrase that we've come to know called mystics without monasteries. I feel he's somebody who's lived this experience. And so I've had some questions that I've been wanting to ask someone for a long time. And Craig was willing to explore this conversation with me. So I think you'll really enjoy it. It's very interesting, as you'll see. So let's open as we normally do with a poem by Antonio Machado. It's called, Is My Soul Asleep? Is my soul asleep? Have those beehives that work in the night stopped? And the water wheel of thought, is it going around now? Cups empty, carrying only shadows? No, my soul is not asleep. It is awake, wide awake. It neither sleeps nor dreams, but watches, its eyes wide open, far off things, and listens at the shores of a great silence. Antonio Machado is one of Spain's greatest poets. No longer living, but wrote some very powerful poems, as this one was.
Spirit flow through me like a melody, ancient and brand new, for the song is you. May all people hear strains so sweet and clear. Let your joy come through, for the song is you. I will be the instrument you play. Bring your sweet music to me each and every day. For what joy I know to be in the flow. Every note rings true when the song is you. Spirit flow through me. I will be the instrument you play. Bring your sweet music to me each and every day. And what joy I know to be in the flow. Every note rings true when the song is you. Every note rings true when the song is you.
So let's take a moment to go into prayer before we listen to our conversation. Just to begin the service with a prayer. And I wanted to start it with a Bible verse from the book of Isaiah. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." What a comfort it is to know with confidence and certainty that in every moment, at every choice point, the Holy Spirit will guide us to right action. The still small voice that we're told can be found within each of us is our unfailing guidance system, always already present. The voice may be still and small. We may need to go apart for a while to hear or feel God's direction, but it's nevertheless a constant source of clarity. We go beyond the limits and confusions of the mind, the old looping tapes that have nothing to offer us, to the breakthroughs we find in the higher mind of spirit. We thank you, Spirit, for this pearl of great price, for this knowing we are never alone, never without God's presence, and everyone has this gift of grace within them. We are so blessed, and so it is. Amen. So let's begin our conscious conversation with Craig Stephen Phillips. Well, thank you, Craig, for having this conversation. I think I mentioned to you earlier that I've been wanting to have a conversation with someone like you who's gone through a lot of extensive work, with great spiritual masters, but continues to live in the world, at least from my observation. That's what you've continued to do. Yeah. So, and we've heard a lot in the last 25 years about mystics without monasteries. That and the model is that back in the, from what better term we'll call it, the olden days, if you had a big spiritual awakening, you would go to a monastery. And I guess during that time of this, and I remember, I don't know if you've read Bernadette Roberts' books, but she had been a nun and then she came out of the convent and actually had some of her more profound spiritual experiences after. Yeah. But she talks about if this was happening in the convent, you'd go in a room and they'd take care of you for a while. And then somehow you'd assimilate your experiences and then you would, continue to live in the convent. But so this mystics without monasteries is a pretty modern phenomenon, and you must have a lot of experience with that.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, I thought of Jesus and the Buddha, some of the great masters and my teachers who are, they're not in their bodies anymore, but through their example, just take Christ, for instance, or the Buddha. They did not have a monastery. They didn't have the, at the time of the Buddha, there was not Buddhism yet, right? And in the time of Jesus, there was not Christianity yet. Oh. Even though there were monastic traditions already around when they were on the earth, they themselves were teachers that lived fully in the world. So I always look to their example as a light in my own life, and to know, because I've had times in my own life in the past where I had contemplated going into the monastery. And, Mary Jean, really, it was at times when I was experiencing difficulties. And so it became a thing where I really had to look very deeply. Was I running away from the world to go into the monastery because I didn't want to handle certain issues, or I just didn't want to handle the stuff of the world anymore? It can get very, very heavy, as we all know. And when I looked very deeply, it was that I was running away. And that's never a fruitful way to enter a monastery. In our earlier conversation before you started recording, you had mentioned being called. And I realized that I didn't have that calling to go into the monastery. And so even the attempt to go there would have been a lot of suffering for me, because you really need to have that you really need to be drawn to give up the world and focus completely on God or your meditation on the spiritual path. And so for me, that was not going to be the way when I was honest with myself. And then as I was in the world, all of my teachers, the living teachers would say that actually, um, it's those of us that remain in the world that have the most difficult spiritual path. That people who go into the monastery who do feel that calling I was talking about, they have it easy, right? It's really true. And
Yeah.
so, because those of us that are in the world, we're focused spiritually on our spiritual path, and we have all of these other things going on in our life, right? We have you mentioned this, we have relationships, we have our health, we have our job, and all of these things are pulling us, and it can feel so often that I just don't have time to pray or meditate or be focused. And so all of my teachers have said that why it's so fruitful to be in the world is that if we're going to really deepen our spiritual experience, we need to spiritualize our entire life. And so we become a monk in all aspects of our life. It's not anymore just about living a spiritual life. Okay, now I have time for meditation, or now I have time for prayer, and then I go to work, or then I handle my relationship. No, all of those things become part of our spiritual path. Isn't it true? And so in that way, we're constantly living that. We're constantly being called, and it's not perfect. Sometimes we forget, but we're being called to bring our spiritual understanding and our depth to our relationships, to our partner, to our job, to our every aspect of our life is being called for that. And so I think in that way, that's why it is so fruitful to be in the world. And I'll just say it this way, be a monk in the world, right? And being a monk means just to simply bring this state of awareness that I'm describing right now to every single aspect of your life. And of course, that's much more difficult than being away in a monastery where you can focus solely one pointedly on your spiritual path.
So, I won't ask you the question of why in the world did we sign up for this somewhere on the other side and say, okay, we're going to be the pioneers of
Yeah.
this model of the world, because this is not something that existed until now, correct? I mean,
Yes.
there may have been certain individuals,
Mhm.
but to the degree that it's happening now
Mhm.
is pretty new.
I agree.
And yeah, and as you say, this is kind of tough. This is hard.
Yeah.
And where it gets hard is when you talk about those big three: health,
Mhm.
money, and relationships. Because, well, in my own experience, I'll just say that um, to look at money in a sense of you mentioned Jesus. Jesus was homeless, right?
Yeah.
I mean, his friends would take him in, and patrons or whatever. But and I think I also mentioned before we started talking that growing up, I grew up Catholic, and the model in Catholicism was not appealing. Of I don't own anything.
Mhm.
That was supposed to be part of it, and you know your how you look didn't matter, and you didn't have family, you didn't have a family and get married and have children and all those things, which at the time I was in it, I thought that looked completely unappealing. But then there were a lot of years after after spirituality
Mhm.
that I thought that looks really good, not to have all this to navigate through a lens that I really hadn't. And it's hard to find those teachers. It's hard to find the person that will help you to navigate through that.
Yes, yes. And I completely agree with you, Mary Jean, that we've undergone a paradigm shift probably in the last, I would say last 20 years, up to about 1990, 1985. It was still, no matter what path you got on, it was still very much dedicated to a teacher. going off, like if you became a Buddhist, going off into the monastery. Even Christians had that sense of, wanting to get away from the world and being very dedicated to a teacher or a particular way. And I think the paradigm shift happened in around 1990, for me at least, when I got away from that kind of path where I was devoted to a guru or a particular person and that path that they represented. And then suddenly teachers like Eckhart Tolle and Adyashanti and other teachers came into my life that were very much right in the world. They had, in the case of Eckhart now too, have spouses. They know what it's like to live in the world, to have jobs, to have navigated all of the challenges that I was going through. And I know when that shift began to happen and those teachers began to come forward, and there's more than just what I've mentioned. And a lot of that came out of because the gurus and the teachers that were in those lineages were having problems with a lot of scandals and a lot of other things. Their integrity wasn't completely together. And so people like me began to look for teachers that were living in the world, but not of it, right?
Yeah.
And they really are modeled on what Christ did or what the Buddha did. They weren't modeled on a monastic tradition or needing to be a part of a organized path. And I think when that shift began to happen, it was very, very fruitful for me because of what we're talking about today. And that was, I felt like the teachers that came along during that time could relate to who I was. They knew what it was like to be a human on the path, dealing with your health, dealing with your relationships, and dealing with these other issues. And not only that, their teachings were about navigating that in the highest way with a higher awareness. So I think that that was a really, really profound time. And I think we're still moving out of that, which I think is good for everybody, because it really is teaching us to, again, live in the world, but not of it. And for me, what that means is simply to be fully engaged in what I do, in really being present to every moment of my life, but also developing a lightness, or I don't want, a lot of people don't like the word detachment. But what I mean by that is we don't take things so seriously. We develop a perspective about the world so that we're not bowled over by it, but we use our spiritual teachings as a way to flow with it and to navigate things more fruitfully, right? I would say it this way: to see God in everything, to see God in every moment, every event, every circumstance that arises. And again, it's much more difficult for those in the world than it is for those who are following a more traditional path in the monastery.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that we can speak to is while we have not been called to the monastery, although there are times when you would like to make a visit or retreat, whatever, that's important.
Yes.
But we do need a spiritual community.
Yeah.
And finding that spiritual community is something that I think all of us who have been called to the spiritual path, or whatever language you want to use for it, I think it's just critically important to have that. I don't know how to put it. It's a structure. For me, it's been an enormous, almost a laboratory, right? Of just like, relationships are a laboratory, and your relationship with money is a laboratory. That spiritual community, if you don't have one and you say, well, I'm just going to be out here on my own doing a few things. Yeah, it's sort of something. It's hard to explain to people when you say, well, you don't need to be with one guru, and you don't, but you've got to have that spiritual community.
I completely agree. I often talk about one of the Buddha's teachings where he said that that enlightenment, this experience of waking up to who we are, is dependent on three things. And he likened it to a stool that has three legs. And he said the first for this experience is meditation. The second is the teachings of truth called Dharma. And the third is what you're getting at, Mary Jean, it's community. It's the group of people that you practice with that support you and sustain you in continuing when you don't want to continue. They give you their example, they inspire you. And the Buddha said that those three things are so important to continuing. And he said, of those three, the most important is your community.
Oh.
And for me, I've contemplated that a lot, and it's exactly what you're getting to. The community is there to support you, but it's also there to, bring you up against those times when you're judgmental, or you might not like somebody in the community, or they rub your ego in a certain way that kind of wears you down or awakens you to something in yourself that you need to look at. And there's also that part of the community that inspires you and really gives you that inspiration to continue when you don't want to continue. You develop friendships. And in my own life, after all of these years, it's those relationships that I have with my spiritual community and my own students that have been the most beautiful. That's my true family. Yeah.
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 So there must have been a point, Craig, when you decided that you were going to start teaching. And I'm interested in that because I'm assuming that you didn't just start teaching the day that you
Oh no.
the day that you took up meditation or whatever. And I ask because it's a big step, isn't it, to say I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to teach what I know, teach what I've learned, teach what I've been taught. And I just want to visit a little about that decision.
Yes. It's true. And if I, as I look back, actually, the choice was made for me almost. It wasn't, I never set out to be a teacher in this way. And it began for me after, many years of meditation practice. And then the first opportunities that I got to teach were back probably about 2002 or three. And it really came through teaching Tai Chi and Qigong was the first times that I had classes. And so it really wasn't something that I set out to do through my study. It was something after a couple of years. I was getting ready to move to Hawaii at the time. I was here in Orange County. And my Tai Chi master at the time, he said to me before I left, he said, "What would you think about teaching?" And it hadn't really been present to me until then. And I had to really go inside and look at what he was asking me. And then I said, yes, maybe that would be good. And then he looked at me very deeply and he just nodded his head and he said, yes. He said, you should teach when you go to Hawaii. And so that's the way it happened for me. It was very organic. And then I went to Hawaii and I was, the teaching developed very slowly. And then when I got back from Hawaii after about 4 years, it was a number of years before I decided to go to seminary. And then after that, because I was in an interfaith seminary, I really didn't know what my path of teaching would look like or what my ministry would look like. But I was already teaching Tai Chi and Qigong again. And then very organically, Mary Jean, out of that came this knowing that what I wanted to do was, if I was going to bring anything to people, I wanted to be based on the background that was, most resonant for me. So that was Buddhism and Taoism. And then from that point, after I got out of seminary, really, God or the Tao has just unfolded everything in a way that's been very, very effortless and organic. And it's built on itself. And so, for me, there was a choice to go to seminary, but the way that it unfolded after that has been very much beyond my conscious choice. And so out of that organic way of emerging, it's stayed very true to what is in my heart. And so I think and I think any teacher that you meet, is also still a student. And that's why I always say that for me, I'm still a student of my own students. I'm still a student of the masters that have impacted me so deeply. I give all honor and devotion to them. And really, the teaching comes out of that relationship.
Like the Dalai Lama says, I'm just a simple Buddhist monk.
Yes.
In other words, I'm not special. There's just nothing, and you know, we all kind of go, oh right, your holiness.
Right.
But you know, I understand the feeling, I guess, that he has behind that he's still learning. I guess one question that occurs to me is when you in all those stages that you described, do you ever have moments where you feel like, who am I to be saying these things, or who am I to be teaching these things?
Well, you know, it's more a feeling that I'm not teaching at all. It really is more a feeling that it's just coming through. And so there's this feeling that when I sit and I do a Dharma talk or I lead a meditation, that there really is a higher energy that comes and moves through. Because I realized early on, Mary Jean, as my teaching was beginning to unfold after seminary, that if I thought I was doing it or responsible for it, it was not going to work. It would have been overwhelming. And so there was a very deep surrender, and that surrender keeps going on to this day, where when I lead a class or a meditation or an intensive, whatever it is, there is truly a feeling that something comes through rather than me doing it, because if I was doing it, it would be a mess. It's so true, you
Yeah,
know. And so I love, you know, and that feeling early on was a surprise to me, and it was a call to surrender. And I'm you know, it's a continual process where that goes on. And I noticed that the more I do that, the more effortless the teaching becomes, because it's not about me at all. You know, I always say that it's the Tao that's doing everything, and it's so true.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure that I just think of all the people that are uh, really trying so hard to make something happen for themselves,
Yes.
to, um, you know, who look at it like, well, you know, I've got these bills to pay, and I got to, you know, make this happen. Or, you know, I really want this relationship as opposed to that relationship. And if I just get that relationship, but what you're describing is this, you know, a sort of a state that we all kind of aspire to, I guess, is this effortlessness. But it's interesting that you tie it to the word surrender, which is another word that we don't like. We don't like that word, just like we don't like detachment. We don't like surrender either.
That's right. And
Yeah,
we don't like the word discipline. That's that's also become a word that we don't want to hear. And yet, you know, I emphasize to my students over and over that if peace is what you want, if joy and contentment and this state of flow is what you want, it's going to require the discipline of doing your spiritual practices. And I think that that's true of surrender. It's true of non-resistance. And really, you know, the state that I'm describing here in Taoism, and this is something that I will definitely get to at one of the Sunday talks that I do at Unity, and perhaps even, you know, a class, is this practice in Taoism called Wu Wei. And a lot of people are attracted to Taoism because of this one practice. And it really is about effortless doing. It's about the literal translation of Wu Wei is doing, not doing, or what I would say effortless action. And it's this state of being in the flow where things just take care of themselves or unfold effortlessly. And that doesn't mean that we don't have to put our energy, but our energy is always directed in the way the flow is going rather than fighting against it. And so when we harness that energy of the Tao and begin to move with it, and we begin to act very skillfully about where we direct our energy, things begin to happen much more effortlessly and without exhausting us. And if something doesn't happen that we're putting our energy toward, we know that that's not meant for us right now, and we direct our energies in a more fruitful way. But I think everybody is attracted to that feeling because we have a sense that life really can be that way. It can be much more effortless than we might imagine it to be, and we don't have to waste our energy. But a lot of times that requires us letting go of things that are not serving us anymore or that are not meant for us. And it also includes this state of surrender that we're talking about to the will of the Tao, right? You know, or as Christ said, not my will, but thy will be done. To me, that's one of the highest teachings that he uttered. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, it's one of those things we at Unity we call that simple but not easy.
That's
Um,
that's right.
it's very simple, but it's very difficult to do. Um,
Absolutely.
and because we're so I read an article recently about the Dalai Lama telling, really saying all of you Westerners, and he didn't use that term, but you think you're such individuals, that you're so individual that you are out there on your own and everybody's out dog eat dog. And, we have this idea that, if it's going to happen, I got to make it happen. So the idea of, surrendering and being in the flow is like, it sounds good, but boy, we don't want to do that. We think we're, and that's why I think so many people are drawn to Eastern teachings, because there is that sense of just being fed up with yourself and sick of all of the, trying to make this individual view of, and maybe what we're talking about here is sort of a blending of that Eastern view and Western view of, making some things happen, but in that effortless way. I mean, it's a very provocative idea, isn't
Yes, and when you said those words that you're, sick of it,
it?
it reminds me, Mary Jean, one of my favorite teachings in the Tao Te Ching is when Lao Tzu said, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you move toward wellness. And so I think there's such wisdom in that, that people, I think what happens is we get so exhausted with trying to control the flow and control our lives. And if we're lucky, we reach a point of exhaustion where we just cannot hold on to that anymore. And in the letting go, it's almost like falling backward off a cliff. We find that we're carried, that we're held. And in that holding, we can begin to trust that that flow is taking us in every moment exactly to where we need to be. But you're right, this is something that the Western mind especially really has a lot of trouble with, because we're taught from the beginning that we can control things.
Yes.
And, I think once you see even a little bit that the control is an illusion, then you start to say, okay, if control is an illusion, if I don't have the control I've always believed I have, then what is there? How can I navigate this life in the most skillful, happy, and joyful way? As the Dalai Lama said, we are here to experience happiness. And we can give that a lot of words. It could be satisfaction or contentment, but we're not here to suffer. We're not here to have an experience that's dreadful and heavy. And the only way that we're going to move to that lightness and into that sense of ease and flow, really the key is there's this call to let go of the illusion of control.
And I'm sure you've heard the expression, God never gives you more than you can handle.
Absolutely.
And I think it's the worst possible idea, because we just have this idea that, if this is coming to me, I got to handle this. The greatest gift that I ever got was the day that I said, I cannot handle this. Yes. I cannot handle this. I have no idea what to do. I'm completely surrendered because I don't know. And to this day, I always, whenever I hear that God doesn't give you more than you can handle, I think only if you're really blessed does God give you more than you can handle.
Look, I sometimes tell my students that when things get really heavy, when the challenges are really heavy on your shoulders, that, tell God, tell the Tao, you know what? Can you lighten this up a little? Turn the heat down a little. Because if we look at challenges as a way to set us free, to bring us to this state that we're talking about today, that's beautiful. But sometimes we've all been there. It can all get a little bit overwhelming. And I think that there's been more than once in my own life where I've told the Tao, can you please turn the heat down a little? Because I need a little break here from my mind and from the challenges going off out here. And sure enough, the temperature gets lowered a bit, and then it comes back up eventually, because we all have to face those things that are kind of binding us and holding us back. But I think that's a legitimate point. We get to those points where we need a little break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm just so encouraged to hear that you're saying that you got one. You got it a little. The degrees dropped down a little bit. And I think just not just acknowledging, you're not supposed to be handling all this. You don't have to handle it. This is God's business. You'll be guided, which is the main thing. I think that you'll receive guidance and maybe the guidance in that moment is go take a nap.
That's exactly right, Mary Jean. As the Dalai Lama said, sometimes the best meditations are go take a nap.
Really? He said that, huh?
Is that beautiful? It's so practical that, we think that we have to bear all this, and that's it. And, in that way, the spiritual life can become this drudgery where we're trying to hold up the world and trying to deal with all of these issues. And, I will say this, and I've said this to my students a lot, is that once we're on the spiritual path, if we agree that the spiritual path is about inner freedom, whatever that means to you, I wouldn't tell anybody what that means for them. But if ease and harmony in the Tao are what we want, then to me, what the Tao is going to do is it's going to look at let's say that it's like a chain. It's going to bring you experiences that kind of focus in on your weakest link. So if you have a propensity for anger, let's say, or jealousy or whatever, you're going to keep getting experiences that highlight that and keep focusing on that. And sometimes it can get pretty heavy. But I also know that if it gets really heavy in the challenges of life, like I said, just by asking God to kind of take the heat down, it does tend to work.
Yeah. And it's so, I think, there's a quote in the Bible about by their fruits ye shall know them.
Yes.
The idea that, and I used to think that meant that people, really spiritual, holy people, were very dour and, serious. And, that's probably my Catholic upbringing, right? It was all so dark and, and now I think those are the people that are laughing, like you're laughing and smiling. And, obviously there are times, I think of the Buddha with this little smile.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's not to say that this is all funny, but there's a lightness about it.
There is, Mary Jean. I think that's important to remember. Again, I often say to my students that enlightenment, it means lighten up. Right? Really, to me, that's what the state of enlightenment is. It's a state of lightness of being. And when we find ourselves getting really heavy or caught in the challenges of life, I always feel like if I just shift my perspective to one of lightness a little bit and let the light in and let there be, let there be light and, come around to a little humor, because, many of my teachers have said that what's happening here around us, the only seriousness is in our mind, our story, that God is playing a very light game here. And it may seem pretty heavy sometimes, but just know, one of my teachers used to say, just know that when you get really heavy, you've moved away from who you are. You want to come back to that lightness, to lightening up, and to be very, very mindful of that, because spiritual life is not a heavy business. It's not about being heavy and pious, like you said, or dour. It's really the opposite. With my own teachers, they all laughed a lot, right? They could be serious and they could be very one-pointed in their teaching and even be fiery in the way that they would go after your ego. But there was always this lightness and love underneath that they had discovered, this joy. And that doesn't mean that they hadn't been through some really major challenges in their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Craig, for leaving us with this message of, lighten up. Enlightenment means lighten up. And it's not to diminish anyone's pain or
No.
whatever, but it is to say that there's a joy undergirding all this that, um, and I know that you, like so many teachers, it's not that and maybe we've answered our own question about being mystics without monasteries means you've been in the soup with all of us here, all of us humans,
That's right.
and you've also found the lightness of spirit. So
Absolutely. You know what? I think that that's really well said. And I think that's the fruit that comes out of your practice. And again, I think that when we find ourselves getting a little too heavy, that we just need to bring a little light and love into our heart and lighten up on ourselves. I always say, take yourself off the hook. Nothing all that important or serious is really going on here. It's more that the mind makes it up to be more serious or more challenging than it is. But if we just, breathe open a little bit, we can rediscover that lightness within our own heart. And as you know, Mary Jean, as we change our attitude and we open up in that way, what begins to show up is also lighter. It has those qualities. It's not the reverse, as you were saying earlier. We try to go out and we try to change things, or we try to force things to happen, or if I just get this or that. It's actually just the opposite. If we change the inner landscape to one of more light and one of more joy, then those are the experiences that begin to show up to us more and more.
which is a very unity idea, right?
Uh,
What we hold in our mind produces after its kind. So,
True.
and it's a very powerful teaching, just like yours are.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Craig, so
Uh,
much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Mary Jean. That was a really wonderful conversation. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Craig. We talked about a lot of things, and I think Craig's guidance, especially what sticks out in my mind, is what he said about the Buddha, that the community is the most important aspect of the spiritual life, the most important tent pole. Um, Certainly meditation and the Dharma, the teachings are important, but the community itself is so important. And so what a perfect time for us to support our spiritual community. There should be a link for you to click if you would consider making a contribution to Unity of Tustin so that we can continue our work in the world, so that we can maintain the beautiful property that we have, our meditation gardens, and mostly to maintain the community as a whole, the spiritual community that holds us all together. So let's say the love offering blessing together. Divine love as me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. And so, in closing, we want to close tonight with the great affirmative prayer of unity, the prayer of protection. The light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Thank you all. Please join me next week on Conscious Conversations.
Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in to the deepest kind of love, to the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul. Everything I've ever done, everything I've ever seen, everything I've lost or won, everything I've ever dreamed has brought me here to the present moment, here to a new beginning, here, and I'm seeing life so clearly now. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in to the deepest kind of love, to the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul. 'Cause here I go, deeper, deeper, deeper than I've ever been before. Here I go, closer, closer, closer to my sacred source. Here I go, deeper, deeper, deeper than I've ever been before. Here I go, closer, closer, closer to my sacred source. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in to the deepest kind of love, to the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul. Get ready, my soul.